Hello, in this tutorial we're going to be looking at how to create loops and work with conditional statements as a way to automate our data. Let's begin. We've been looking at this chart throughout this course and kind of progressing along. We said, hey, if we can use in-cell formulas, we can pretty much automate 30% of our data needs. If we can record macros, now we can automate more of our data needs, something like 50%. But we can't do everything. Now we're getting into some coding structures that will allow us to do quite a bit more automation. I'm estimating around 80% of your automation needs can be achieved with the use of conditional statements and looping in code. And so that's what we're going to focus on right now. This will be a big step forward for you when learning VBA. So let's look at a scenario to kind of give us context. Let's imagine that we have a data set here, and this data set needs to be transformed based on this crosswalk right here. So you can see we have this network OSS ID and these values, and look, we have a column here called network OSS ID, and we have a bunch of those values going down. Now, this crosswalk suggests that the number 24 actually should equal NCP. Now, by the way, this is all just kind of fictitious data, so NCP is meaningless, but this is a good scenario. We do this quite a bit. Often databases will not house character letters, they'll house numbers. And so when you bring the data back out of the database and you want to use it for a business application, you have to convert that back to the business value. And so this is a realistic example while these values are meaningless. And so that's why I picked it. So you can see here that in this column, we have all of our network OSS IDs. And this, we need to transform them into their business values. Now, what we want to do is we don't want to overwrite this. What we want to do in this case is write those values next in the column next here. So in column D, so if this is 24, we want that to be NCP, which it is. If it's 25 here, we want PNP, and so forth, going all the way down. Now, you're probably thinking, well, hey, I could probably do this with a clever nested if statement. If B2, so if B2 equals 24, then NCP. If B2 equals 25, then PNP, and so forth. And that's right, you can do that. But this is a critical point in your working with Excel, because what we want to do is we want to move away from in-cell formulas as much as possible, and we want to start to automate all of this with VBA. It'll allow you to do, again, way more quicker, and the edits will be, if you need to come in and change things, it's way easier. And again, we can do maybe this what we're doing right here is just one small part of a bigger data automation challenge that you're working on. And so maybe you can't even write this in the cell, because this is a part, like one small chunk of a bigger data automation. So there's many reasons to move away from in-cell formulas, and we're going to do that right now. So what are conditional statements? Well, conditional statements are coding structures that check a variable and perform code based on the results. So this is a rough example of what a conditional statement is. We have a statement here that says if 24, then NCP. Else, if 25, then PNP. Else if 26, then TWN. And else if 27, then OON. Now, that is very intuitive, that it's checking a variable. So it's a coding structure that checks a variable. In this case, the variable is this cell value right here. So this cell value, this cell value. And then it's going to perform code based on that. And so we're going to assign NCP if 24, we're going to assign PMP if 25, and so forth. So this is called a conditional statement. Now, this is just for, like, the way I wrote it right here is not strictly correct. I'm going to teach you how to actually write a conditional statement. I'm just getting the foundations down so you can see the concept, and we'll move forward with it in a little bit. Okay, well, what are loops? So loops are coding structures used to repeat blocks of code as many times as you require. So this is a block of code right here, and we need to repeat that however many times, however many rows of data there are. So that's pretty cool. Well, we want to learn how to use loops because we got to repeat this sucker many, many times. So here's how we look at a loop. There's several different kinds of loops, but I'm going to stick with one that is pretty intuitive right now, and that's called the for next loop. Now, here's the start of it right here. For row 2 to 60,009. Notice that this data set here has 64,009 rows. So and then notice the data actually starts on row 2. So data starts on row 2 and it goes all the way down to 64,009. So our looping statement is going to say this: for row 2 to 64,009. Next. So notice that there's this next here. So here's what's going to happen. When you're running the code, it's going to enter this for next loop. It's going to say, hey, okay, let's check row 2. And then it's going to look at this, it's going to look at this block of code, and it's going to perform this conditional statement. So we know that row 2's value is 24, so NCP. Then it's going to come down to this next line, and it's going to jump back up here. And now we're at row 3. It's going to repeat this block of code. For row 3, we're 24 again, so NCP. It's going to hit this next, come back up. It's going to repeat this loop until we've reached 64,009. That means we've run all through the rows, and then it's going to exit the loop and continue going down whatever code you have, or it's going to end the program. So that's really cool. This structure here, these two structures, the conditional statement and the for next loop, are powerful, and they're very fast, and they allow you to perform a lot of automation really quickly and easily. Okay, now there's one problem though. Notice that we've hard-coded this value right here. That's a problem because today our data set has 64,009 records today, but tomorrow it could have 32,000 records, and the next day 150,000. And so this number we need to make dynamic. We need to turn this into a variable, and then have Excel or VBA read how many rows of data there actually are, and then change that variable. Well, how do we do that? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. Now, I like to call mine all data rows. That makes sense to me. You can name this anything you want. Notice I have dim all underscore data underscore rows, and I'm setting that as a variable type as long. And remember, we said long is a number value. So the computer is expecting this variable to be a number. Okay, well, we're going to assign all data rows equal to this equation right here. Now, this looks long, but it's really easy. Let's break it apart. So we know that we're going to be working with worksheets, provider network. I didn't show it down here, but this worksheet's name is provider network. We're going to be starting with range A1. So we're going to kind of queue into A1 here. And then the only thing new is this chunk right here, but this is pretty intuitive. Dot current region, so this is a region of data, current region of data, dot rows, that makes sense, so dot rows, and dot count. So if I had to translate that, I would say, hey, all data rows is going to start in cell A1. It's going to look down in the current region. When it finds a gap in data, it's going to count the number of rows there. So this, when we run this, when the code passes this line, it's going to assign all data rows to the value of 64,009. Well, that's really cool because tomorrow when we come back, if the data is more, if it's 150,000, well, all data rows is going to equal 150,000. So how do we use this? Where would we put this variable? Well, we're going to put it right here. So for row 2 to all data rows, that's great. This is how we do it. Now, there's one little thing we have to do also. I was being generic here when I put row 2. We have to be a little bit more formal about that. So I'm going to create another variable called current row as long. Notice it's a number. And then all I'm going to do is say, hey, for current row equals 2 to all rows. And then this is going to make this loop work. This is the syntax for how to use a for next loop. Well, our next step is to actually employ this conditional statement and this looping structure in an actual project. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you go out and I'm going to have you open the workbook called Looping and Conditional Statements Provider Networks. Get the Provider Networks workbook open. Notice that there is one worksheet. And just like the example I've been talking about, we have 3 columns of data, this network OSS ID, and then it literally has 64,009 records in it. So pause the video, go open that workbook, and when you get that workbook open, come back and we can resume the video. Okay, well, I'm assuming that you have this workbook open now, which you'll need because what we're going to do is we're going to start actually coding this out. And here's, let's do this together. So as I'm working here, I'm going to need you to also be working side by side with me, typing as I type, pausing the video when you need to pause it, coming back, watching it, and so forth. So hang with me as I'm developing here. Okay, well, first we need to open our VBA Editor window. So I'm going to click on the Developer menu item, and then I'm going to click on the Visual Basic Editor. A window will appear. Notice that we're working in our workbook here, looping and conditional statements, provider network. Notice that we only have one sheet here. So I say let's start doing our coding in this sheet. To do this, we're going to declare a subroutine. So I'm going to say sub, and I'm going to name this transform network ID. Now you can name this anything you want. I'm going to name it that. Notice that I can't have spaces in my, so I couldn't do that. See how it balks at you? So you can't have spaces in your subroutine names. That's why underscores are really nice. Some developers like to do camel type. That means it looks like this. It would look like this, network ID. So no spaces, and then they just capitalize the first letter of the word, the next word. So keep this one small, and then make the next ones big. Sometimes I find that a little hard to read, so I like to have underscores there. So we just created a subroutine. That's great. Now, well, let's first start by creating some dim some variables. We're going to create our first variable, and I'm going to call that last row of data, and I'm going to set it to long. Remember, that's a number value. Okay, I'm going to now assign that, assign it to last row of data equals worksheets. Now, what was the worksheet name? Here's the worksheet name. I'm just going to double click on that and copy it and then paste it here. So, hey, we're going to assign it to that worksheet dot range A1 dot current region dot rows dot count. There we go. So if we did this right, we should be able to hit F8 and see that it works. Current region dot rows dot count. Let's see what's going on here. Application defined, object defined error. Worksheets, provider network, dot region dot rows dot count. Current region dot rows dot count. I wonder what's going on there. Let's try it this way. So all I'm doing here, let me show you what I did. Instead of using worksheets and then provider network, that's the name here, all I'm going to do is put this value here, sheets for capital S. So I'm going to replace this whole thing with sheets for. Now what's nice, or sheet for, I'm sorry, sheet for. Now what's nice about this is if someone comes, by declaring hard coding in the sheet number, so sheet 4 here, if someone comes and changes this value, it's not going to mess up our, let's say they just have it be provider. And you can see that it changed it here. But that's not going to affect my code because I've hard coded that sheet 4 number. So that's kind of a cool way to do it actually. Okay, so now I'm going to step through it, F8. And when I hover over it, you can see now last row of data equals 64,009. That's exactly what we want because that's how many rows of data we have. I'm gonna, just for fun, I'm gonna add another row of data here. So you can see now I'm at 64,010. And I'm gonna stop this and I'm gonna start it over. F8, 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 64,010. So that's really cool. So we just declared this variable and we found the last row of data. Okay, well, let's declare another variable. We're going to call it current row as long. And you're going to see how we use that in just a second. So I'm going to stop the... Now let's create the for next loop. So I'm going to say for current row equals 2, because remember we're starting, we want this code to start actually at row 2, not row 1. That would mess things up because that's not a value. So we're going to say for current row equals 2 last row of data. And then we're going to come down here and say next. Okay. So if we wanted to, what we could do, I'm going to show you a little trick here. We could say stop here. I'm just going to put that in here. This will stop the code. I just want to show you that we're going to be entering this and looping through this. So I'm going to hit F8, hit F8, hit F8. Now, current row right now equals 0 because we haven't assigned it to 2 yet. When we click F8 again, now current row equals 2. We know that last row equals 64,010. And notice that we went inside of this for loop. Now when I hit F8 again, now current row equals 3. This still equals 64,010, and we're inside, we're looping like this. Now current row equals 4, 5, 6. So we're just looping and looping, and we're going to do that all the way until we're done. Okay, so what do we want to have happen as it's looping in here? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to have the program or have Excel read the value of this cell. So we're going to create another variable. We're going to say dim, and I'm going to call this ntwkossid underscore value. And I'm going to set that to string type. I know this is a number, and remember, string is just like letter characters. And I know this is a number. So it seems odd that I'm doing that, but really, we don't really want to calculate. We don't want to ever say like 24 plus 24. We just want to get the value, the character value of this. So setting it as a string type, setting this variable as a string type is the safest way to do it. Okay, so I've created a variable called network OSSID value. I'm going to paste it inside of the for loop. Now I'm going to set that equal to, remember we said sheet 4 dot, now I could do this either way. You guys know ranges and you know cells. Let's do it with the range B. Now and current row dot value. So this might be new to you, but just hang with me for a second. Every time as we're looping through here, we need to get the value of whatever cell we're at in the loop. So if we're on row 10, we want to get the value of this cell. Well, that is column B. And then you remember that every time I loop through here, current row goes up by 1. So here we're saying we're going to start with B2. So we're looking in sheet 4. The first time we go through the loop, we're going to be looking at, hey, this sheet, and then B2.value. Well, B2.value is 24. Then we loop up again. Now current row equals 3, so this is B3. And now that's going to equal 24. B4 is going to equal 25, and so forth. So we're variabilizing the value in these cells here. That's really great. Now, let's test this out just to make sure this is working. So I'm going to click at the top. I'm going to hit F8. We get our last row. Now, when I click by that, notice 24. 24 again. Now, current row equals 4. So this now equals 25, 25, 26, because B6, and we know that current row equals 6 right now. So this is how we're grabbing that value right here. That's pretty cool. I'm going to stop it. Okay. Well, we're most of the way there. The only thing we need to do now is grab our crosswalk and write our conditional statement. Remember that our crosswalk said this. It said if the value is 24, then we want the business value to be NCP. If it's 25, PNP. If it's 26, TWN, 27, OON. And remember that I showed you that we are going to be using a conditional statement like this. And I told you that, well, this isn't really how we write it, but it kind of gets to the idea. Well, let's learn really how to write this right now. So I'm going to come back to Excel here. And we're inside of our loop. Notice that here's the for next loop. We're inside of it. And we're right under where we declared our cell value variable. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say if, now I'm going to say ntwkossid value equals 24. Then, now notice that I hit return. And I'm going to hit tab. So I'm going to tab it in. You'll see why we do this in a second. Then I want something to happen. Well, let's wait on that for a second. So here I'm going to say else if ntw, really what I'm going to do is copy this. This will go a lot faster. Else if, notice that there's no space. If that value equals 25, then I'm going to hit return a few times. Else if our variable equals 26, then else if this value equals 27, then, and then importantly, we're going to say end if. So an if statement starts like this. It says, if our variable equals 24, then notice I left a space here, do some code. And I'm going to fill this in just a second. Else, if the variable equals 25, then do some code. Else if 26, then do some code. Else if 27, then do some code. Great. By the way, let's keep it simple here. You could just have this conditional statement. If the value is 24, then do a bunch of code. So this is the basics of an if-then statement. We need to be a little bit more complex because we have 4 values that we're reading against. Okay, well, you guys, what do we want to have happen if this value equals 24? We want this cell right here, so D2, to equal NCP, because that's what our crosswalk says. If 24, then NCP, just like we have here. Well, how do we do that in code? How would we get how would we write the value 24 to D2? Well, let's look at that. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, remember that we're working in sheet 4. We can just grab this chunk of code right here because this says sheet 4, so that's this sheet. Now we want to say D, so column D, and current row, we want that value to equal NCP. So it's really as simple as that. Let's run through that and see if we can get this value to equal NCP. So I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to hit F8, 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 F8. We know current row equals 2. And if current row equals 2, then we know this value equals 24 because that's right here. So if this value equals 24, which it does, it goes inside of it and it pulls out, it does whatever line of code is here. And you can see that it wrote that NCP right there. Then it jumps out of our loop. It doesn't check any of these anymore because we told it not to. It found out that it equaled 24 and then it jumped out. Now we jump back up. It equals 24 again, that's right. So it's going to write it there. Jump back up. Now it equals 25. So notice that it skipped over here. If this value equals 24, notice it didn't go inside of there. It skipped over it. Now, what would we put here? What do we need to put here? Well, we can just grab this line of code right here. This is what's fun about VBA. You can just grab this line of code here, and instead of being NCP, if it's 25, we want it to be PMP. So we can just change this out, PNP. So let's click next, F8, and we can go look at that and see that we wrote it there. Okay, well, let's keep going. So if it's 26, then TWN. And if it's 27, I remember this, it's OON. So now we can just, keep hitting F8, F8, and we can watch over here as it's reading the cell value here, and it's populating that. Now I like to clean things up a little bit, so let's do that. Let's do that. Great, that's looking really good. Okay, last thing I want to do, I'm going to get outside of our loop. This is our loop right here. This is the end of our procedure. So we don't want to write any code down here, but in between our loop and the end of the code. So once we're done with the loop, I want to put a message box. I'm going to put MSG box, and I'm going to put the word complete. So this is just going to pop up a little message box at the end saying that we've completed the code. Now we can keep going and keep going. This is going to take us a long time to F8 through this. You can see that it's working, but you know, right now we're at 17 out of 64,000. So instead, I'm just going to hit the play button right here. It'll take about a second or two. And then it'll say complete. And we can go visualize it. So we can go inspect and see that everything worked as appropriate. So you guys, this is looping and conditional statements. This is a really great example. We use this code all the time. I've used, to develop automation, you'll use a structure like this, 15, 20 times in a bigger automation, and it works really great. Notice a couple things. Notice that I indented the code one level from the sub. Notice that within the loop, I indented all of my code one level. It's a tab key, so I just hit the tab key to indent it. So indent, indent. And notice that in my if statement, I indented one level, one tab. So that this distance right here. This makes code very readable and usable and editable. I also like to keep my white space consistent. So now imagine having, 1,000 lines of code, 5,000 lines of code that's kind of doing a bunch of different stuff like this. It's really simple to read when you have it spaced like this, when you have it indented properly like this. So that's it for now. I hope you were able to follow along and complete this. What we'll do, actually, before we leave, what I'll do is, just like before, let's create a button here to execute this code. So I'm going to start this over. I'm going to delete all of the values here. I'm going to come to our developer, insert, form controls. Now we have a button here. I'm going to drag that button out. I'm going to assign it to our transform network ID. Remember that we want to edit the text. We're going to right click on it. We're going to say edit text. And let's say transform network IDs. Okay. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger like that. I'm going to move it. Remember, to move this, I can't just click and drag it. What I got to do is right click on it and then click out of it, and then I can move it where I want. Now, let's click it and see how long it takes. What happened here? Let's try that again. So I'm going to say insert, form controls. I'm going to assign transform network ID. Yeah, that looks great. So let's assign macro. There it is. So again, right click, edit text, and I can say transform data, whatever you want to call it. Now let's try that again and see how long it takes. So not even a second, maybe 2 seconds it took to kind of buzz down that data and do it. So very good. Okay, well, that's just the beginning of loops. There's quite a few quite a few more tricks and tips and different looping structures to do, but this is the basic. If you get this down, you're going to be able to do quite a bit of automation for your projects. Um, okay, be looking out for the challenge after this. This is the end of this video.